Undercover Black FBI Offers tip at his diner. The slap of the humiliated waitress stopped him cold. The noise was not metal on porcelain, nor the hiss of the industrial espresso machine. Just like a gunshot, it was singular, brutal, and intimate. The sickening, hot slap on the face of an innocent, poor black waitress who was just working to survive amidst folks who saw her color as a crime and regular target and suspect. Oh, how I feel like crying narrating this story to you, my beloved family. Before I get drowned in this deep, emotional story, I would love to appreciate you for always stopping by to hear me pour out my heavy heart. And if this is your first time coming across my videos, please subscribe so as one family we can share our burdens together. Feel free to drop how you are feeling and let me know what you feel about this video too, and don't forget to let me know where you're watching from. Let's continue. Oh, how the sound sliced through the morning chatter at the Compass Rose Diner, causing the few loyal regulars, truckers, and early shift nurses to freeze mid-chew. Susan, the 25-year-old waitress, was the epicenter of the sudden, heavy silence. Her hand flew instantly to her cheek, leaving a smear of damp coffee grounds. She stood paralyzed, a shattered ceramic mug pooling brown liquid by her feet. Manager Angela Charles, a woman whose efficiency was matched only by the icy cruelty of her gaze, slowly lowered her hand. Her face, usually tight and controlled, was flushed with a self-satisfied, racist rage. "You people disgust me," Angela hissed, her voice loud enough to carry across the muted dining room. "Always clumsy, always expensive, always making excuses. That coffee pot cost $50. $50. I'll dock you the full week's pay. You hear me, girl? Maybe a few days without rent money will teach you how to hold a cup." Susan's shoulders began to shake, her eyes fixed on the puddle she'd made, tears streaming silently down her face. Nobody moved to help. The public humiliation was the point. The theft of a week's wages was the punishment. In the back corner booth, the one built strategically adjacent to the reinforced manager's office, sat Mrs. Kennedy. She wasn't just another black patron, though her discreet navy blazer and thick-rimmed glasses completed the perfect civilian cover. She was special agent in charge, Prince Kennedy, the highest-ranking FBI agent currently on the Eastern Seaboard working Operation Janus. Mrs. Kennedy wasn't observing the waitress. She was monitoring the pulse of the diner's complex cash flow and communications. Her eyes had been fixed on the flashing, encrypted display of her phone, waiting for the geo-confirmation ping of her intelligence courier. On the table beside her phone lay $100 cash, meticulously folded, the intended tip for the rendezvous. But the slap, delivered with chilling, absolute authority, stopped the federal operation cold. The image of Susan's stunned obedience superseded the screen. The $100 tip meant for the criminal underworld suddenly felt sickeningly close to the $50 Angela had stolen from Susan. Mrs. Kennedy silently adjusted the subtle recording device sewn into the collar of her blazer. She had been recording the financial transactions for 3 years. Now, she would record the abuse too. Angela Charles had made a fatal error. She forgot that the meek, absent owner she believed she was manipulating was actually a high-level government operative, and the silent, black woman in the corner booth was about to shift the entire focus of the FBI's regional anti-corruption unit. What Mrs. Kennedy did in the next 60 seconds, an unauthorized, immediate activation of federal resources, would derail the investigation of a U.S. senator, but it would utterly shatter everything Angela Charles thought she controlled. Some justice requires a badge and a warrant. Other times, it demands invisibility. 3 years before, Mrs. Kennedy had created the Compass Rose Diner not for profit, but for precision. The Bureau had needed an unremarkable, high-volume cash business to run clean money traces and act as an intelligence hub for Operation Janus. The intricate, delicate investigation into Senator David Thorne's illicit political funding. For Mrs. Kennedy, this diner was more than just a cover. It was a sanctuary. Having fought systemic racism throughout her rise in the Bureau, she insisted on creating a workplace that, at least on paper, offered a safe zone, a place free of exploitation. Her official FBI mandate required absolute non-interference with local management to maintain the integrity of the long-term cover. To run the day-to-day operation, she'd hired Angela Charles. Angela possessed the necessary rigid, unforgiving efficiency needed to keep staff compliant and books impeccably clean for any routine audit. Mrs. Kennedy had told herself the frequent, quiet complaints and the high staff turnover were simply normal churn in the difficult service industry. Her immense, agonizing focus on Senator Thorne's millions, the political corruption threatening national stability, had blinded her. She had mistaken Angela's ruthlessness for reliability, allowing a regime of daily terror and systemic racism to bloom in the very space she had built for safe passage. Her ambition had exacted an unanticipated price. Mrs. Kennedy's phone buzzed with an internal, encrypted message from her accountant sent 3 weeks ago. Subject: anomaly. Unscheduled ghost deposits in subsidiary account. Revenue flat, but liability variance spiking. Look at this now. She had filed it away, dismissing it as operational noise. Then came a second, unauthorized coded message from an agent she knew was monitoring the region. Check your periphery. Cover compromised by internal instability. She had called back, the number disconnected. Mrs. Kennedy had buried her mounting anxiety under layers of procedural diligence, focused only on the senator. But 48 hours ago, she had noticed the small, telltale tremble in Susan's hands when she served her coffee, a sign of exhaustion and fear. Now, watching the raw, racist slap, she understood the source of the instability. The political investigation could wait. The humiliation of an employee, the betrayal of her trust, and the destruction of dignity in the space she controlled could not. Mrs. Kennedy reached for the burner phone, her movements clinical, decisive. She sent a 1-second burst transmission to Agent Miller, her handler, containing only 4 letters: Janice.breach. She wouldn't warn Angela. She wouldn't wait for Miller's authorization. Mrs. Kennedy was done being the absent investor. She was going to intervene, and she was going to expose the whole nightmare using the most formidable resources at her command. Mrs. Kennedy didn't wait for the confirmation message to register. The burner phone was already sliding into the deep, padded pocket of her blazer, secured next to the $100 tip, now entirely irrelevant. She didn't need to look at Susan or Angela to understand the next 60 seconds. She only needed to understand the 3 years that had led to this moment. The sound of the slap still echoed, a discordant cymbal crash in the theater of her memory. It was the sound of a carefully constructed fortress, built stone by agonizing stone against the forces of corruption, collapsing from within. 3 years before, Special Agent in Charge, Prince Kennedy, had stood on this exact concrete slab, then just a skeleton of steel beams, arguing with 3 contractors and a skeptical Treasury Department official. Operation Janice demanded 2 specific criteria for its intelligence hub: absolute cash flow and absolute anonymity. "We need a sponge, gentlemen," Kennedy had explained, her voice sharp and uncompromising even then. "A high-volume, low-margin business that cycles untraceable dollars. People need food, quickly, cheaply, and without judgment. A high-end restaurant draws attention. A bookstore is too slow. But a diner? Truckers, nurses, shift workers, they live on cash and coffee." The Compass Rose Diner was born not of culinary aspiration, but of logistical necessity. Every single inch of it was a lie dressed in formica and fluorescent light. The ancient-looking POS system was a direct, encrypted fiber link to Quantico. The reinforced manager's office wasn't for safety. It housed a high-fidelity sound receiver and servers capable of scrubbing billions of transactions for the telltale signature of Senator David Thorne's illicit PAC transfers. Kennedy, working off-book as the silent investor, had sunk millions of bureau dollars into the facade, crafting an environment so utterly unremarkable it was invisible. The goal was to track the massive political corruption threatening the nation's infrastructure, to follow the millions that flowed into Thorne's pockets. It was a mission of national security, requiring the highest degree of procedural distance. The owner had to be perpetually absent, the operation entirely hands-off. This was my sanctuary, too. The narrator's voice, raw with self-reproach, bled into the memory. Kennedy, who had clawed her way up through the Bureau despite constant systemic resistance, had insisted that her cover operation be a model of decency, a safe passage employer for marginalized workers, offering fair wages and above-board scheduling. The irony now choked her. She had fought the rod at the highest level of government only to let a virulent, localized cancer consume the very soul of her own creation. The memory shifted to the day she hired Angela Charles. Mrs. Kennedy had conducted the interview via encrypted video link from a satellite office 1,000 miles away, maintaining her crucial physical distance. Angela's resume was a study in cold, effective management. She had a reputation in the regional hospitality circuit for maintaining perfect margins, for mercilessly culling redundant expenses, and for high staff discipline. "My business requires a manager who prioritizes structure," Mrs. Charles, Kennedy had stated, her tone flat. "The books must be immaculate. The staff turnover rates are acceptable, provided the work output remains high. Are you capable of maintaining ruthless efficiency?" Angela had met the digital gaze with a chilling, proprietary stare. "I run a tight ship, Mrs. Kennedy. I don't tolerate sloppiness, tardiness, or excuses. My staff understands their place and their responsibilities. If they don't meet them, they are replaced." Kennedy had focused on the keywords: structure, discipline, immaculate books. She had seen Angela's lack of warmth not as a character flaw, but as the essential antiseptic needed for the operation's cover. She specifically established the ironclad rule of absolute non-interference. Angela would manage everything internal, and Kennedy would only handle the macro financials and audits. "I trusted the spreadsheets over the human heart," Kennedy now thought, the regret a physical weight on her chest. "I needed a clean, efficient mechanism. I hired a monster." She had filed away the increasing internal audit reports, the small, unscheduled deposits in subsidiary accounts, the anomaly text from her accountant detailing rising liability variance with flat revenue, the telltale sign of unrecorded fines, breakages, and docking of wages. She had seen the high staff churn, 6 cooks and 10 servers in 18 months. She had dismissed it as the acceptable price of Angela's required ruthless efficiency. Janice was everything. The senator's millions overshadowed Susan's stolen wages. The slap shattered that focus completely. The $50 Angela stole from Susan today was a direct echo of the $50 charge for the coffee pot, yet it represented 3 years of unchallenged power. The micro-corruption Kennedy, the advocate for safe passage, had allowed to flourish right under her nose. Mrs. Kennedy watched Angela, who was now straightening her apron with the smug satisfaction of a victorious predator. Susan still stood, eyes burning with a silent, devastating misery that Kennedy felt like a physical strike. "I built the system that allowed this. I financed the oppression." The systemic racism Angela perpetuated, the casual docking of pay, the public shaming, the assumption of inherent clumsiness and expense, was the true internal instability the Bureau agent had warned her about 48 hours ago. The instability wasn't financial, it was moral. It had compromised the soul of the operation and, by extension, the integrity of the special agent in charge herself. Her phone vibrated sharply in her blazer pocket. It was Agent Miller, her handler, responding immediately to the authorized breach code. "Miller, Janice.breach? Confirmed courier aborted 3 minutes ago." "Explain." "Immediate." Miller's concern would be monumental. That code meant the primary target, Senator Thorne, was endangered or the long-term cover was blown. Kennedy closed her eyes for a fleeting second, the heat of the diner's silence pressing against her. She was about to commit the cardinal sin of her career, redirecting the focus of a multi-agency, multi-year, multi-million-dollar investigation to address a local managerial issue. She pulled out the burner phone. Her fingers flew across the encrypted keyboard, refusing to offer an explanation that would be immediately overridden. She didn't type local abuse or racism. She typed a new code, unauthorized and unambiguous, signaling not a compromise by Thorne, but a collapse of the very location they were using to track him. She put the phone away, her breathing measured and clinical. Rose. Broken. The Compass Rose Diner was no longer an asset. It was a crime scene. She adjusted her thick-rimmed glasses, allowing her gaze to drift from Susan's shaking shoulders to Angela's triumphant, cruel face. The silence in the diner was about to become much louder. Special Agent Prince Kennedy was no longer the invisible, absent owner. She was home. The slap was the prelude. The subsequent humiliation, Mrs. Kennedy knew, was Angela Charles's perverse dessert. Angela grabbed Susan's trembling wrist, not with force, but with the chilling assumption of total control, and steered her past the terrified counter staff toward the back. This was the most vulnerable part of the Compass Rose Diner. The small, windowless supply closet adjacent to the reinforced office wall, directly opposite Mrs. Kennedy's booth. I have spent 3 years monitoring a senator for macro corruption, and I missed the micro-tyranny happening 5 feet from my face. Mrs. Kennedy did not need to follow. The specialized glasses, built to overlay classified data streams onto the mundane reality of the diner, were already recording. A pinhole lens, undetectable within the thick frames, tracked the manager and the waitress. More critically, the parabolic microphone integrated into the booth's leather padding was now focused entirely on the closet door. Inside the closet, the acoustics were tight, the voices metallic and clear. "You think this is over, girl?" Angela's voice, low and venomous, sliced through the speakers in Kennedy's earpiece. "That $50 for the broken cup? That's for the visual. Now we deal with the paperwork error." The video feed, a grainy, low-light but high-definition recording, showed Angela stepping into Susan's space. Susan backed against the stacked cans of industrial coffee. "My paycheck," Susan stammered, the words barely audible. "Your paycheck is an administrative nightmare, Susan. Payroll doesn't process partial fines. So we fix it now? Cash." Angela reached into Susan's apron, her movement brusque and practiced, like picking lint. Mrs. Kennedy watched the feed as Angela's fingers expertly extracted the crumpled stack of bills Susan had presumably saved for rent or bus fare. She separated a $50 bill and shoved the rest back, folding the extracted note neatly into her own pocket. 2 weeks. That's the probation, Angela hissed. One more slip, one more wine, and the whole mess gets wrapped up. You understand me? Yes, ma'am, Susan whispered. Mrs. Kennedy leaned back, her composure an immaculate fortress. The video and audio proof were time-stamped, encrypted, and already cycling through the Bureau's primary server as a Level 4 evidence packet. The burner phone, however, was already screaming. Agent Miller's secure line was a rapid series of agitated, high-frequency pings. She answered immediately, her voice flat. "Kennedy, Prince, what in God's name was Janice.Breach, followed by Rose.Broken? I have 3 division chiefs demanding answers." The courier vanished. "Thorne's team is expecting a confirmation ping. Are you compromised?" Miller's voice, usually steady, was laced with panic. He was seeing the destruction of a multi-year federal asset. "The cover is fundamentally compromised." "Miller," Kennedy replied, keeping her voice barely above a whisper, despite the booth's sound-dampening capabilities. "But not by Thorne. By the manager. We have an active, systemic civil rights violation and theft of wages occurring on federal property, financed by federal funds." "A civil rights violation? Prince, we are tracking millions in political corruption. You nuked the operational hub because the manager docked a waitress's pay? Get back to protocol immediately. We can handle local issues through the proper channels after we close Thorne." "No," Kennedy said, cutting him off, her rank asserting itself like a physical barrier between them. "I'm the SAC for Operation Janice, Miller. My priority is integrity. The integrity of the operation has been destroyed by the rot we allowed to take hold here. This is not a local issue. It is a failure of leadership, and it must be addressed now. This diner, built to uphold justice, has become a place of crime. That is my breach." She pressed the attack before Miller could object further. "I need an immediate, comprehensive digital profile of Angela Charles. Bypass the standard HR file. I want all payroll logs, the accountant's anomaly reports from the last 6 months, her background check, and every single disciplinary note she has filed on any employee. Flag all variances over $20. Send it to my secure line now. I will handle the political fallout. Miller hesitated, a strained silence stretching across the secure connection. Prince, this will generate massive red flags. We're diverting resources designed for national threat targets to a minimum wage labor audit. I am aware of the computational cost, Agent. Consider the cost of moral failure. Give me the data. I'm giving you priority access, effective immediately. She disconnected before he could argue further. Now, she had to wait for the system to churn. Activating FBI forensic accounting on their own cover operation was a procedure fraught with internal peril. The computer systems would first flag the request as self-auditing, then escalate the data access permissions through 3 layers of security, all of which Kennedy had personally designed. It required surgical precision to target Angela without triggering an immediate, intrusive full audit that would expose the diner's true purpose to the lower echelons of the Bureau. While the servers processed her demand, Mrs. Kennedy used the lull to observe the rest of the dining room, the silent witnesses. The dishwasher, a young man with a permanent slouch, kept his eyes fixed on the gray industrial sprayer, moving with a manic, fearful haste. The line cook, busy frying bacon, flinched visibly when Angela, emerging from the closet with her purse tucked securely under her arm, walked past the service window. Their fear was not just of losing a job. It was the raw, exhausted terror of surviving under a dictatorship. Susan, returning to the floor, moved like a ghost, her uniform damp with tears, her hands trembling harder than before. The deep circles under her eyes, Kennedy now realized, were not just from long shifts, but from the constant, low-grade anxiety of anticipating the next public attack. Mrs. Kennedy checked the time. Less than 6 minutes had passed since the slap. The raw data dump was beginning to stream into her encrypted phone. The screen flickered, displaying the first devastating header. Accounting Anomaly Report, Angela Charles. Subsidiary Account Activity, July 2024. She had asked for a data profile. She was about to receive the blueprint for Angela Charles's private empire of exploitation. The investigation of Senator Thorne's millions suddenly seemed distant and sterile. The real, immediate war was now being fought here, over a stolen $50 and the shattered dignity of one young woman. The fluorescent lighting of the Compass Rose Diner, usually a harsh, sterile white, seemed to flicker and dull as Mrs. Kennedy stared at the burner phone screen. The data dump from Quantico was complete, flowing across the display in a torrential, categorized cascade of numbers and names. The first few lines confirmed everything Mrs. Kennedy had suspected from her accountant's vague anomaly reports. High frequency of disciplinary fines, discrepancies between reported revenue and cash deposits, and the spiking liability variance. But the core of the data revealed something far more sinister than managerial cruelty. Mrs. Kennedy tapped a command on the screen, isolating the direct deposit logs. The diner's operational system, the very one the FBI had installed to track Senator Thorne, showed a meticulously clean payroll. Hourly wages were paid on time, taxes deducted correctly. But beneath the surface, the forensic accounting had unearthed a secondary shadow ledger, a system Angela Charles had implemented by leveraging her administrative access to the Bureau-installed POS system. This was the ghost payroll. It wasn't just docking $50 fines for broken mugs. Angela was skimming an average of 15% off every employee's hourly wage, transferring the funds via microtransactions into a subsidiary savings account opened under the diner's name, but controlled entirely by Angela. The disciplinary fines and theft of tips were merely the visible psychological mechanism designed to enforce compliance and distract from the systematic drain. She wasn't just cruel, she was running a high-volume internal racket, Mrs. Kennedy realized. The ruthless efficiency she had hired was simply effective camouflage for large-scale, sustained theft. The total estimated theft over the last 18 months, cross-referenced with the high staff turnover, amounted to nearly $250,000. Kennedy felt a hot wave of professional shame. She had been staring at this precise cash flow for 3 years, focused on Thorne's offshore accounts, and had failed to see the hemorrhage taking place beneath her own feet. The analysis sharpened. The ghost account, designated CRD S44, wasn't growing at a rate commensurate with the theft. Money was flowing out quickly in structured deposits to a series of regional banks. Mrs. Kennedy cross-referenced the deposit patterns with known FBI regional intelligence on organized crime. Her breath hitched. The small, laundered deposits, $9, $500 here for $1,800 there, all meticulously structured to avoid federal reporting thresholds, matched the known cleaning method for a major narcotics distribution ring operating out of the eastern seaboard ports. Angela Charles was not just stealing from her staff. She was using the FBI's sophisticated, deep-cover intelligence hub, the Compass Rose Diner, as a deliberate, unwitting node in a money laundering scheme. Her systemic abuse and racism weren't just personal failings. They were an intentional, psychological smokescreen designed to terrify the employees into silence while she used their wages to finance organized crime. The intervention was no longer a moral necessity. It was an operational imperative. Angela Charles had compromised Operation Janus from the inside out, turning the FBI's most sensitive cash flow monitor into a personal crime machine. Scanning the employee files, Mrs. Kennedy tracked the login access reports. The standard background checks were accessed during the initial hiring, but Susan's file showed 3 subsequent, unauthorized access attempts by the manager's terminal, one as recently as 3 days ago. Why the intense scrutiny on Susan? Kennedy brought up Susan's redacted background file. Her internal systems immediately flashed an alert. FBI Family Proximity Alert. Susan's full name was Susan Jefferson. Her maternal uncle, decades ago, had been a highly effective, deeply valued informant for the Bureau in a massive regional sting operation against a corrupt union boss. The uncle was now long retired and protected under an identity relocation program, but the family connection was hard-coded into the Bureau's security system. Angela knew, or at least Angela had found enough in Susan's paperwork, a redacted address, a missing father, a reference that seemed too carefully vetted to suspect she was different. The specific, intense cruelty directed at Susan, the public humiliation, the $50 slap, suddenly made horrific sense. Susan wasn't just a random victim of racist management. She was being tested, targeted, or perhaps even used as leverage. Angela must have believed that if Susan was connected, she could either exploit that connection or ensure Susan's silence through overwhelming intimidation. The betrayal was doubly deep. Angela wasn't just abusing the employees. She was actively endangering someone tied to the FBI family structure, directly within a federally protected space. Mrs. Kennedy lowered the phone, the clinical chill of professional detachment giving way to a white-hot resolve. The scale of the immediate threat, a money laundering operation actively running through her hub, and the targeting of a vulnerable family member, demanded an end to the covert operation. She had to retrieve the original recording hardware from the secure server inside the manager's office. This was the only place to shut down Angela's network access, secure the physical evidence of the money laundering logs, and retrieve the full, unencrypted tape of the abuse. Angela Charles was currently in the back of the dining room, talking loudly and cheerfully to a trucker, basking in her renewed sense of authority. The key to the reinforced office door, a biometric digital lock, was on a chain around Angela's neck. Kennedy had 1 minute to become invisible again, prepare her exit, and formulate a strategy to neutralize the manager and gain access to the secure room without a physical confrontation. She reached into her blazer pocket, not for a weapon, but for the highly directional, localized network jammer, a device designed to prevent outside digital intrusion, but equally effective at creating internal chaos. The time for observation was over. The time for the SAC to reclaim her territory had arrived. The moment had arrived for Special Agent in Charge, Prince Kennedy, to violate the core rule of her 3-year cover: physical intervention. Angela Charles was laughing now, a brittle, triumphant sound, as she poured a refill for the trucker, ensuring the entire dining room witnessed her return to dominance. Her back was to the corner booth. Mrs. Kennedy reached into the inner lining of her blazer and palmed the discreet key fob. It was not a conventional key. It was a digital access device, keyed to the biometric override sequence of the reinforced manager's office, the FBI secure room, the existence of which was unknown to Angela. One soft press of the fob, and across the room, the faint, almost imperceptible click of the locking mechanism disengaging registered in Kennedy's sensitive earpiece. The door was now unlocked, but still closed, visually secure. She rose slowly, her movements deliberate and calm, adjusting her navy blazer. She walked toward the back, past the counter, giving a curt, neutral nod to the terrified counterstaff. The ambient sounds of the espresso machine and the sizzling griddle seemed deafeningly loud against the quiet thrum of her own pulse. "Just using the restroom, dear," she murmured to the dishwasher, who froze, startled by the unexpected address. She reached the secure room door. It opened smoothly, silently, confirming the remote override. Kennedy slipped inside and immediately relocked it using a manual bolt switch, plunging the small room into a controlled darkness. The manager's office was a meticulously curated space, reflecting Angela's obsession with control. Filing cabinets stood in perfect rows, invoices were stacked by date, and the desk surface was immaculate. Yet, the high-fidelity receivers in the walls hummed quietly, betraying the room's true purpose. Mrs. Kennedy immediately moved to the desk. She knew precisely where the security vulnerabilities of the FBI's own system lay, because she had designed them. She reached beneath the desk and felt for the barely perceptible seam of the hidden compartment. A soft pressure and a directional swipe opened a panel in the wood. Inside lay the true nerve center of the Compass Rose Diner. A small, hardened drive containing the daily server logs, the full, unencrypted data stream of the financial transactions, and a physical true logbook, the operational journal the Bureau required for cash-heavy cover entities. Kennedy pulled out the journal. It was bound in cheap vinyl, designed to look like a generic accounting ledger. But inside, Angela had filled the pages with her own meticulous, chilling record-keeping. It was not a financial ledger. It was a ledger of cruelty. Next to the coded entries detailing every dollar skim from the ghost payroll, Angela had recorded personal details of her staff, alongside specific, targeted humiliations. Susan J., aunt in Detroit, highly sensitive. Weak spot, rent money. Dishwasher, green card status uncertain. Leverage, threat of ICE report. Cook, El son has asthma. Leverage, shift cuts / no insurance. The systemic abuse was laid bare, not random, opportunistic racism, but a calculated, clinical methodology for control. Angela was not just docking wages. She was cultivating crippling fear to ensure absolute compliance for her external criminal activities. "I didn't hire an efficient manager," Kennedy thought, her voice tight with fury. "I hired a blackmailer." Mrs. Kennedy secured the physical logbook and placed it inside a deep pouch in her blazer, Exhibit A. She needed to deactivate the system entirely. She reached under the large, industrial desk mat where Angela kept a calculator and a coffee coaster. Beneath the mat, stuck with a small piece of masking tape, was a folded paper napkin. It was not a receipt. It was a crude but detailed, hand-drawn diagram. The diagram showed the rough layout of the diner, the walls of the manager's office, and a heavily circled, specific point on the north-facing wall. The exact location of the FBI's armored conduit, containing the fiber optic line that delivered all encrypted communications between Quantico and the diner. Next to the drawing were a set of detailed coordinates and a date, tomorrow afternoon. Mrs. Kennedy's blood ran cold. This was not about Senator Thorne or the narcotics ring or even the $50. Angela Charles was planning to betray the entire operation. Angela hadn't simply stumbled into a high-level FBI cover operation. She had identified it, compromised its integrity, and was preparing to sell its existence to the highest bidder. The high-volume money laundering through the ghost payroll was a way to accumulate enough capital to pay off the political faction looking to neutralize Senator Thorne's investigation. By selling the coordinates, Angela would expose the Bureau's nerve center, risking not just the operation, but the lives of every agent currently running Operation Janus. The instability wasn't internal. It was existential. The immediate threat was no longer an angry manager. It was a deeply embedded criminal mastermind who had turned the Sachs' careful construction into a ticking bomb. The humiliation of Susan was merely a side effect of a vast, high-stakes political betrayal. Kennedy reached for the communications terminal on the back wall, the device that allowed her to interface remotely with the Quantico mainframe. Her hands moved swiftly, decisively. She initiated the emergency cover deconstruction sequence. A message flashed across the terminal, coded and urgent. Full shutdown initiated. Field team en route. Execute immediate extraction. Kennedy knew what that meant. Agent Miller wasn't just sending data anymore. He was scrambling a fully armed tactical team. But they were hours away. She still had one essential item to secure: the hidden cash reserve used for operational expenses. She accessed the secondary safe hidden behind the file cabinet. It contained $20,000 in clean, unmarked bills. She needed this cash to execute the immediate plan, a rogue operation she was about to initiate without field support. She took the money and, before leaving, accessed the office desktop computer, the official machine Angela used for all legitimate transactions. With a few keystrokes, Mrs. Kennedy isolated the ghost payroll system and hit the command she had been waiting 3 years to use. Every dollar Angela Charles had skimmed, stolen, or docked from every current and former employee, cross-referenced against the true logs, was now being immediately processed for return. The funds would hit their bank accounts within the hour. Justice required a badge and a warrant, but sometimes it required a silent, crushing economic correction. Mrs. Kennedy stepped out of the secure room, the operational logbook and $20,000 cash secured in her blazer, the small piece of paper with the coordinates clutched in her hand. She was no longer the absent owner. She was the SAC in the field, and she was about to make a very public arrest. The air in the diner felt suddenly thin as Mrs. Kennedy walked out of the manager's office. She paused for a fraction of a second, allowing her eyes to adjust to the harsh light. Angela Charles was still at the counter, counting change, her shoulders radiating smug satisfaction. Kennedy's burner phone vibrated again, demanding attention. It was Agent Miller, now using a high-priority, dedicated channel, a sign that his frantic concern had escalated to full operational command. She answered, her voice cold and level, despite the seismic shift in her situation. Kennedy, Prince, you have initiated full cover deconstruction. Do you understand the implications? The Janus team is now dark. The entire infrastructure is burning. Miller's voice was tight, struggling against an overwhelming anxiety. You need to secure the physical evidence and wait for local PD. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage Angela Charles. We will leak the assault and theft evidence to the local precinct. That buys us time to rebuild. That is unacceptable, Miller. It is the necessary protocol. We are sacrificing a managerial charge for a senatorial arrest. Prince, that is the equation. You secure the room, you extract, and you allow the local police, not the FBI, to handle the $50 charge. We cannot risk the Bureau's name being associated with a low-level labor dispute, not when we are this close to Thorne. Kennedy stopped walking. She looked directly at Susan, who was wiping down a countertop with vacant exhaustion, still flinching every time the manager's voice rose. The shame of her 3-year negligence was now a razor-sharp motivator. You're missing the scale of the compromise, Miller, Kennedy said, her voice dropping the pretense of a civilian investor entirely. This is not a labor dispute. It is a federal facility being used as a node for major money laundering, with the explicit intent to sell the location of our classified communication lines to a rival political faction. Angela Charles is not an administrative nuisance. She is a high-value domestic threat who has compromised the lives of our agents, including mine. And she targeted someone connected to our family structure. Miller was silent for a tense beat. I've seen the coordinate map you sent. I'm rerouting air support now. But you are still operating outside direct authorization. Your immediate order is to stay in the booth. Wait for extraction. I am overriding that order, Kennedy stated, using the clinical language of a SAC, assuming full command in the field. Pursuant to my authority as SAC for Operation Janus, and given the immediate threat of evidence destruction and flight, I am taking direct action. If the FBI permits systemic injustice, racism, and exploitation to thrive on its own operational property, then our entire institutional integrity is worthless. We are not just pursuing justice for the nation, Miller. We are cleaning our own house. She disconnected the call, overriding the Bureau protocol with a singular moral choice: dignity over expediency. The senator would be arrested, but Angela Charles would be arrested first and publicly for the sake of every staff member she had terrorized. Mrs. Kennedy reached her booth, now a relic of the invisibility she was about to shed. She peeled off the thick-rimmed glasses, placing them carefully on the table next to the folded, useless $100 bill. Without the frames, her eyes, sharp, focused, and intensely aware, looked directly at the manager. The navy blazer came next. It was a perfect civilian cover, but underneath, the tailoring was strategic. The blazer concealed the holstered weapon that was mandatory for all field agents. She pulled the material tight around her shoulders, straightening her spine until the slouch of the absent investor was gone, replaced by the rigid, coiled readiness of a federal agent. Her movements were practiced, economical. From an internal, hidden pocket sewn into the lapel, she retrieved her official, laminated FBI credentials. The badge shone under the diner lights, silver and undeniable. She clipped the badge onto the front of her blazer. Then, she confirmed the presence of a Sig Sauer P229 service pistol, secured tightly in its holster. She did not intend to draw it, but the presence of the firearm was a silent guarantee of control. Prince Kennedy was no longer Mrs. Kennedy. The entire diner, customers, and staff were witnesses to Angela's reign of terror. This had to be the final theater of Angela's humiliation. The key was not violence, but shock and total public disarmament. Angela would expect a discreet audit, a quiet firing, perhaps local police for the assault. She would not expect the sudden, overwhelming force of federal law enforcement revealed by the black woman in the corner booth. She needed Angela away from the front door and the secure office. The counter was too exposed. The humiliation must be public. The staff needed to see their oppressor fall, utterly and completely. The badge and the identity. She would use her full rank and the undeniable authority of the FBI to secure Angela and prevent any attempt to destroy the evidence she had stashed in the secure room. Mrs. Kennedy took one final, deep breath, inhaling the smell of burnt coffee and fear, and exhaling the procedural caution that had haunted her for 3 years. She moved from a booth, her expensive, polished leather shoes clicking definitively on the tiled floor. She walked toward the counter, toward Angela, with the deliberate, heavy stride of federal agent approaching a suspect. Susan, wiping down the counter nearby, finally looked up. Her eyes widened, focusing on the change in the woman she thought was just a loyal, silent customer. Kennedy didn't break stride. She was 2 feet from Angela Charles, who was now smiling patronizingly, ready to take her order. "I need to speak with you," Kennedy said, her voice resonant, carrying effortlessly across the suddenly silent dining room. "Now!" Mrs. Kennedy stood 2 feet from Angela Charles, the silence in the Compass Rose Diner now a physical presence. The scent of stale coffee and industrial cleaner seemed to solidify around the 2 women. Angela, still radiating the smug confidence of a petty tyrant, forced a tight, managerial smile. "Ma'am, if you need a refill, you just need to—" "I don't need a refill, Angela," Mrs. Kennedy cut in, her voice low but authoritative, carrying the undeniable weight of command. It sliced through the professional facade Angela wore. Angela blinked, momentarily thrown by the use of her first name, and the direct, non-customer tone. She glanced nervously at the few customers, the truckers, the nurses, all watching the sudden tension. "Mrs. Kennedy," Angela started, attempting to maintain control, using the name she believed was merely that of an absent, wealthy investor. "If you have concerns about the kitchen—" "My concerns are federal, Angela." Mrs. Kennedy reached into her blazer. The motion was slow, deliberate, a warning in itself. She didn't reach for her weapon. She reached for the silver shield clipped to her inner lapel. With a final, sharp movement, she revealed the badge. The gold engraving, the bold letters, Federal Bureau of Investigation, gleamed under the harsh, white fluorescent lights of the diner. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Angela Charles's forced smile evaporated. Her face, previously flushed with racist rage and confidence, drained of color. She didn't flinch or scream. She simply froze, her entire frame locking up as the reality hit her. She looked from the badge to Mrs. Kennedy's unwavering, intense eyes that were no longer concealed by thick glass. The customers in the booths stopped mid-sip. Susan, who had just set down a steaming coffee pot, stood paralyzed, staring at the unrecognizable, powerful woman who had just shed her cover. Mrs. Kennedy pulled out her operational phone and made a single, non-encrypted call to the recently activated emergency federal line. "C'est Prince Kennedy. I am at the Compass Rose Diner. I have the target secured. Initiate immediate federal backup and scene containment. Target is Manager Angela Charles, active federal crimes. Priority 1. She snapped the phone shut, never breaking eye contact with Angela. The confirmation of the call, the use of her full rank, and the sound of federal sirens already starting to chirp faintly in the distant city air shattered Angela's composure. "You," Angela whispered, the word strangled, realizing the true identity of the owner she had been manipulating and stealing from. Mrs. Kennedy took a step closer, ensuring the customers and, crucially, the staff could hear every word of the indictment. She was not just making an arrest, she was delivering justice. "Angela Charles, I am placing you under arrest, effective immediately," Kennedy stated, her voice deep, steady, and utterly unforgiving. She ticked off the charges on her fingers, the indictment more devastating than any physical blow. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, stemming from the operation of a dual payroll system and the theft of wages, exceeding $80,000. You are under arrest for aggravated identity theft, relating to the unlawful access and use of confidential employee information for blackmail and leverage." Angela shook her head weakly, tears finally beginning to well up in her eyes. Not of remorse, but of pure, desperate fear. "And you are under arrest for misuse and compromise of a classified federal facility," Kennedy finished, referencing the hidden map on the napkin, the ultimate betrayal. "The physical evidence is secured. Your operation ends now." Angela finally lunged, a desperate, irrational movement aimed not at escape, but at the counter, presumably to grab a key or destroy some small piece of evidence. Mrs. Kennedy was faster. Her training took over. She blocked Angela's path, executing a precise, low-impact immobilization technique. Angela stumbled, cried out, and crashed against the counter, her uniform messy and her carefully constructed authority dissolving into panic. Just as the faint sirens grew louder, pulling onto the diner street, Mrs. Kennedy produced the handcuffs. "Hands behind your back now. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Angela sobbed, her earlier self-satisfied cruelty replaced by raw terror. She offered no further resistance. Moments later, the diner door burst open as two uniformed, heavily armed FBI tactical officers, wearing black vests and bearing the Bureau insignia, flooded the space. They were followed closely by Agent Miller, his face a mask of mixed exasperation and relief. "SSC," Miller acknowledged, seeing the scene, Angela sobbing in her handcuffs, Kennedy standing over her, the badge gleaming. "Secure the prisoner. The rest of the team will sweep the area for secondary evidence." The tactical officers lifted Angela from the floor, securing her wrists tightly. As they escorted her out, they were forced to walk past the entire kitchen staff, who had gathered at the service window, silent witnesses to the fall of their oppressor. Angela, cuffed and defeated, walked past Susan Jefferson. Susan stood perfectly still. The tear tracks on her cheeks were dry now. She looked at the woman who had slapped her, who had stolen her money, and who was now being led away by federal agents. A profound, almost dizzying relief washed over her face, mixed with a fearful awe of the silent woman in the corner booth. Mrs. Kennedy caught Susan's eye, offering a single, subtle nod, a confirmation that the ordeal was over. As the squad cars pulled away, taking Angela Charles into federal custody, Mrs. Kennedy looked around the quiet, now profoundly altered diner. The investigation into Senator Thorne had been catastrophically derailed. She was facing the worst internal inquiry of her career, but the look on Susan Jefferson's face was worth the cost. Mrs. Kennedy turned to Agent Miller, retrieving the logbook from her pocket. The diner is now a crime scene, Agent. Full quarantine, and I need you to confirm that the full payroll refunds have processed. Every single dollar. Confirmed, SSC, Miller replied, shaking his head slightly at the sheer audacity of the action. The funds are currently clearing into employee accounts. You just bankrupted yourself and salvaged their dignity. The Bureau can afford it, Mrs. Kennedy said simply. Dignity is priceless. The immediate, violent tension had broken, replaced by a vacuum of stunned silence. The tactical team was systematically clearing the secure room and the premises, securing the diner as an active federal crime scene. Agent Miller oversaw the placement of yellow tape, but his focus kept returning to Mrs. Kennedy, who stood now among the remaining staff and the bewildered customers. She had an audience. She owed them the truth, and more importantly, restitution. Mrs. Kennedy walked away from the tape and approached the counter. Susan, the line cook, the dishwasher, and the two remaining early shift staff were huddled together, eyes wide with residual fear and disbelief. My name is Prince Kennedy, she announced, her voice calm now, stripped to the arrest's sharp command, but retaining its absolute authority. I'm the owner of the Compass Rose Diner, and I am also a special agent in charge with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A collective gasp swept through the staff. Kennedy looked at their exhausted, hopeful faces. This was the hardest part, the admission of her own systemic failure. For 3 years, I built this place as a cover operation, she continued, her gaze lingering on Susan. I delegated the day-to-day management to Angela Charles, believing that her ruthlessness was necessary efficiency. I was wrong. I was absent. And because of my distance, I allowed a regime of exploitation, theft, and racist terror to thrive in a space I had explicitly promised would be a safe zone. She paused, allowing the gravity of her failure to settle. I failed every single one of you. I prioritized a high-level political investigation over your basic dignity and safety. For that, I am profoundly sorry. She stepped forward, addressing Susan directly, ignoring the surrounding activity. Susan, the humiliation and the theft you endured today and over the past months was a direct consequence of my negligence. I assure you, it will be rectified entirely. Mrs. Kennedy retrieved the hidden envelope containing the $20,000 in clean operational cash. She had already executed the digital return of all stolen wages via the ghost payroll transfer, but the Bureau's bureaucracy meant those funds would take hours to clear. These victims needed immediate solvency. She sat down at a small table, using a clean piece of paper and a pen. She began writing out cash receipts, documenting the transaction for the incoming audit. She was liquidating her own personal, clean assets, ensuring every staff member received not just the full return of stolen wages, but double that amount as compensation for the psychological duress. Line cook, she called, her voice gentle. You missed 6 shifts due to Angela's threats regarding your son's health records. That is quantified here. This is double the wages and benefits you lost. The cook, a burly man named Leon, looked at the stack of bills, tears gathering in his eyes. He couldn't speak, simply nodding and clutching the money like a lifeline. Finally, she turned to Susan, who was still reeling. "Susan," Kennedy said, holding out a large, meticulously counted stack of currency. "This covers your lost wages, stolen tips, and the fines Angela exacted. This also covers 2 months' rent, prepaid, to ensure you have the financial stability she tried to destroy." Susan took the money, her hands shaking again, but this time not from fear, but from the sudden, incomprehensible relief. She looked at the bills, then up at Kennedy's face. The physical realization of solvency, the abrupt removal of the crushing financial anxiety, was overwhelming. I don't understand," Susan managed, her voice thick. "You don't need to," Kennedy assured her. "Just know that you are safe and your money is yours." Mrs. Kennedy's phone buzzed. It was Miller, using the internal FBI line. "Prince, the political fallout is explosive. Thorne's team knows something went wrong. The courier is still missing. We've managed to contain the narrative, for now, as an internal security sweep and administrative firing. But Operation Janus is facing a minimum 6-month delay, pending the internal investigation of your actions." "I accept the consequences, Miller." "Good. Now focus. I need to secure room's external door sealed, the servers pulled, and the diner fully scrubbed. We need 0 residue. What's your timeline?" "The diner is closed effective immediately," Kennedy stated, looking at the assembled staff. "For 48 hours. Full federal sweep and decontamination. I will personally supervise the system's restructure. Tell the Janus team we will resume operations on Monday morning. We will not give Thorne the satisfaction of thinking we quit." She looked at the yellow tape, then at the newly safe staff. "I need you all to take 48 hours. Paid rest. We will meet here Monday morning for a full operational briefing. This diner is now going to become what I promised it would be, a safe zone." As the field agents moved around them, Susan slowly approached Mrs. Kennedy, holding the cash tightly. She wasn't thankful. She was inquisitive, newly empowered by the astonishing revelation of authority. "Agent Kennedy," Susan began, using the correct title. "What happens on Monday? If the manager was that evil, and you didn't see it for 3 years, how do we know it won't happen again?" Mrs. Kennedy paused. This was the question of true integrity. Because the system of oversight was flawed, Susan Kennedy replied honestly. "I put procedural distance between the owner and the management, and that created a vacuum for evil. When we reopen, I won't be the absent investor anymore. I will be here. We will institute employee oversight councils, direct communication lines that bypass the manager entirely, and a complete cultural reset. I will personally supervise the hiring of the new management team. I promise you, this diner will be restructured from the ground up to ensure this never happens again. Your dignity and the dignity of everyone who works here is now Operation Janus's primary metric of success." Susan nodded slowly, finally accepting the promise. The silence in the diner was no longer born of fear, but of a cautious, deeply rooted hope. The immediate disaster had been averted. Now came the painstaking, agonizing work of rebuilding. The scent of the diner was different now. No longer masked by fear and stale anxiety, the air in the Compass Rose, now officially renamed the Rose Trust, was clean, warm, and imbued with the satisfying aroma of fresh-baked bread and genuinely happy industry. It had been 6 months since the slap, the arrest, and the chaotic 48-hour federal quarantine. The rebuild had been immediate and drastic. Mrs. Kennedy had kept her word. The diner was now structured as a fully employee-owned cooperative, its operational integrity secured by redundant FBI auditing software, but its culture governed by its staff. Susan Jefferson stood behind the main counter, wearing a crisp uniform and a badge that read, Susan J., Chair, Employee Council. Her eyes, once shadowed with exhaustion, were bright and focused. She moved with a confident, effortless grace, not the manic haste of fear, but the calibrated speed of competence. She was managing the morning rush, seamlessly directing the 2 new servers and coordinating orders with the kitchen. The kitchen window was staffed by Leon, the former line cook, now the certified head chef and beside him, the former dishwasher, who was currently the primary breakfast cook. Their movements were relaxed, efficient, and marked by easy, professional banter. The systemic change was evident in the details. The tip jar was gone. Tips were now processed digitally and distributed evenly and transparently every 4 hours, monitored by the employee council. Wages were posted clearly on a small board in the break room. There were no fines, no sudden fees, only mandatory, fair structure. Susan paused, taking a moment to wipe down a clean spot on the counter. She pulled out a small notepad and made a note regarding the new scheduling policy she was implementing that week. This was not management by fear. It was leadership by earned trust. In the same back corner booth, the one strategically adjacent to the now rebuilt secure room, which was no longer a manager's office but a shared administrative space, sat Mrs. Kennedy. She wasn't wearing the thick-rimmed glasses or the civilian blazer. She was in a tailored, official dark suit, her demeanor radiating the focused quietude of a high-level federal agent. Her visit was unscheduled, a low-profile audit of her internal mission. She ordered a black coffee and watched. She didn't observe the financial transactions, which were flowing cleanly and being audited automatically by the Bureau's system. She watched the human transactions. She watched Susan patiently explain the new coffee bean supplier to a new server. She watched Leon give the cook a high five for a perfect omelet. She saw dignity. The place she had built for national security had finally become the sanctuary she had initially envisioned. Her phone vibrated silently on the table. It was a secure message from Miller, finally resolving the political equation. Miller, clearance granted. Thorne indicted this morning, corruption charges. Tangential evidence recovered from the Janus server before your breach was enough to tip the scales. You caused a 6-month delay, Prince, but you didn't kill the mission. Kennedy, and the cost? Miller, your formal reprimand is on file. But congratulations. The big picture is secured. Mrs. Kennedy read the message and set the phone down. The cost had been immense. A reprimand, professional friction, and a near collapse of a multi-year operation. But the big picture wasn't just the senator. It was the original moral imperative. She had risked the pursuit of millions to restore the dignity of minimum wage workers. And in doing so, she had purified her own moral standing and the integrity of the facility the Bureau now operated. The political victory felt distant and clinical. The vibrant, trusting atmosphere of the Rose Trust felt immediate and profound. She looked at Susan, who was now smiling naturally, genuinely, as she greeted a loyal trucker. Susan's empowerment, her restoration of worth, was the true success of Operation Janus, the internal victory over complicit absence. A sudden, small commotion drew Kennedy's attention. A young busser, clearly nervous, approached Susan at the counter. "Chair Jefferson," the boy stammered. "I messed up the clean schedule. I'm really sorry." Susan looked at the schedule, her brow furrowed, slightly in concentration. She didn't glare, she didn't threaten fines, and she didn't raise her voice. "I see the error. Marcus," Susan said calmly. "It's the first time you've managed the rotation. It's a training issue, not a compliance issue. We will adjust the closing duties for tonight, and Leon, can you review the sanitation rotation with Marcus after lunch?" "Will do, Chair," Leon called back, without resentment. Susan gave Marcus a supportive nod. "Go serve those coffees, Marcus." No fear. The busser, relieved, hurried back to work. Mrs. Kennedy watched the interaction, an error corrected, dignity preserved, and management acting as a stabilizing force, not a punitive one. This was true power. Susan had internalized the lesson of the slap face and transformed it into a system that protected the most vulnerable. Mrs. Kennedy stood up from a booth. She didn't seek out Susan. She didn't need thanks. Her mission here was complete. She walked out of the Rose Trust, leaving the warmth and the sounds of honest work behind her, returning to the cold necessity of her federal life. She had fed people with dignity, and in doing so, she had, finally, secured her own.